كريس كوستا هو ضابط مخابرات سابق منذ 34 عاما والمدير التنفيذي الحالي لمتحف الجاسوس الدولي. في الآونة الأخيرة شغل كريس كوستا منصب المساعد الخاص للرئيس ترامب والمدير الأول لمكافحة الارهاب في مجلس الامن القومي. كان مسؤولا عن تنسيق سياسة واستراتيجية مكافحة الارهاب وكذلك أنشطة استعادة الرهائن إلى الولايات المتحدة. كان آخر مهمة قام بها السيد كوستا هي قيادة العمليات الخاصة للولايات المتحدة، وكان مدير برنامج في مديرية USS أوكوم ومحاضرا بجامعة نوريوتش في برنامج الدراسات الاستراتيجية وتحليل الدفاع. قام بتدريس وتوجيه الطلاب حول موضوعات متعلقة بالأمن القومي ومكافحة الإرهاب. حاصل على ماجستير في الاستخبارات الاستراتيجية من الجامعة العسكرية الاميركية، وماجستير في الأمن القومي والدراسات الاستراتيجية وBA من كلية الحرب البحرية الأمريكية. تشمل جوائزه العسكرية ميدالية ديفانس سيرفيس وفيلق الاستحقاق ونجمتان برونزيتان. انضم كريس كوستا مؤخرا إلى متحف الجاسوس الدولي كمدير تنفيذي، حيث يلعب دورا رائدا نسبة لنجاحه الاستثنائي في واشنطن وتحدثه بمسؤولية عن قضايا مكافحة الإرهاب والاستخبارات العالمية. من أكثر العمليات المعقدة في العالم ومنظمات الاستخبارات العسكرية إلى البيت الأبيض، فإن الأدوار والمسؤوليات التي لعبها كريس كوستا قد شكلت نظرته إلى عالم مكافحة الإرهاب على أعلى مستوى. Chris Costa, a former special assistant to the president for counterterrorism at the NSC. You are most welcome on Saudi 24 and TV show Vision. My first question has to be about your career as an agent official or on the field official. So can you tell us about the assessment strategy situation worldwide?
So, as an intelligence officer, my principal job for 34 years was supporting our combat operations in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, making sure that our U.S. forces were protected, meaning we collected intelligence to ensure there weren't going to be any attacks directed against U.S. military personnel or civilians overseas. So I did that quite routinely for decades. Worldwide, intelligence services have the responsibility to prevent attacks, terrorist attacks, cyber attacks, and that's what intelligence services are expected to do in their respective countries.
Do you think America is winning the war on terrorism in general?
I don't think we think about a war on terrorism any longer. I think it's a matter of arresting a disease. It's a long-term problem. It's a disease that has to be attacked with various medicines. And in some cases, those formulas are sanctions. In some cases, they're drone strikes. In some cases, it's just intelligence services collecting intelligence. I think we collectively, not just the West, but also our friendly Arab partners are doing a good job of chasing down terrorists that affect security. Certainly a great example is ISIS. ISIS no longer has a physical caliphate. That wasn't a United States operation exclusively. There were 70 some countries participating in the counter-ISIS mission.
How was the participation of Saudi Arabia in this matter?
Well, I think Saudi Arabia has always been a strong partner in the Middle East, and certainly we've relied on Saudi intelligence sharing along with other activities. And I think it's been very positive regarding counterterrorism and also counter-ideological messaging as well. Saudi has been a good partner on those fronts.
We will continue to talk about this in details, but how do you evaluate the role of Iran in promoting regional and global terrorism?
Well, I think Iran certainly is a problem for the region's security. Iran is certainly spreading its wings, and recently the strike against Soleimani
Yes.
really put a focus on Iran's impact in the region, negative impact in the region, not just in Iraq when U.S. forces were there, but currently in Iraq.
Mr. Costa, you said that Qasem Soleimani contributed to the killing and maiming of American citizens, that the Trump administration took action to assassinate him. How do you describe this operation?
The question was about the decision to strike Soleimani. And the bottom line is Soleimani was not an assassination. It was a legitimate strike in the eyes of the national security community in the United States, because Soleimani was very much responsible for attack planning against regional embassies, according to media reporting. So I think it was a legitimate strike. With regard to what Soleimani did in Iran to U.S. forces in Iraq, he was responsible for forces that maimed and killed Americans in Iraq with special explosive projectiles. And much of that is in the open and has been reported widely since the strike.
After this operation, do you think there is plans for getting rid of more organizations sponsored by Soleimani, like Hezbollah and others?
I really can't say. I don't have a good sense for that. I just looked at what the president said about Iran during the State of the Union speech, and he essentially said Iran has an opportunity to change their behavior. I think there's a lot of pressure, sanctions on Iran, and hopefully Iran will change their negative behavior in the future.
During your work as assistant for the president for counterterrorism in NSC for President Trump, how do you see his strategy toward the Middle East, especially the relation with Saudi Arabia? There is a pressure here in USA concerning this relation. How do you see that?
What kind of pressure? I'm sorry.
They are stressing on Trump that he's a little bit more close to Saudi Arabia than other presidents. How do you see that?
Well, I think Saudi Arabia, like many countries in the Middle East, has a leadership role to help counter Iran's malign influence. And I think we'll rely on Saudi Arabia, along with other partners, to counter that negative influence in the region. So that's an important partnership that the United States has with Saudi Arabia. And that partnership has extended back many, many decades.
Mr. Costa, can you tell us about some successful collaboration between the American intelligence and Saudi Arabia during your work as a field agent?
So I didn't work directly with Saudi Arabia, but I think there are countless examples of counterterrorism success in Saudi Arabia against Al-Qaeda. And as a student of intelligence history and counterterrorism, I very much appreciated the partnership. There's also been some excellent counter-radicalization work done with former jihadists in Saudi Arabia that I've been aware of over the years. So those are two examples. Encountering the ideological message is very important in Saudi Arabia. Taking a leadership role on that is also important.
Mr. Costa, what is your opinion about the current involvement of American intelligence in the Middle East?
Is similar to all of our stories here at the International Spy Museum. Intelligence services exist to serve their national security establishments, to protect their respective nations. So the United States, along with many of our foreign partners, are ensuring that they have adequate intelligence, so policymakers and leaders in the United States and other national leaders make the right decisions, well informed by intelligence. So that will continue. It always has, and it always will continue in the Middle East and elsewhere in the world. And we have the museum filled with stories and examples of positive work by intelligence services, along with some operations that went poorly.
Talking about the museum, what is exactly your role as an executive director entail of the International Spy Museum?
So my role as the executive director of the International Spy Museum is to help be the face of the Spy Museum, to talk to people like you so we get our message out that we're an education facility that wants to educate and inform the world on the shadowy world of espionage. As a former practitioner, I can draw upon some of my experience and participate in the storytelling appropriately and responsibly.
What is the historical significance of the museum and the exhibits?
The historical significance of the museum is here in the United States, actually throughout the world, there's no other museum like the International Spy Museum. We have the largest collection of artifacts that are available for the public to see. So we are able to animate the public with our 7,000 artifacts, with our stories that we continually change, with our immersive experiences, our interactives. We have the opportunity to engage the public.
What do you think the lesson can we take from spies throughout American history?
Well, we had intelligence in the days of George Washington. In fact, George Washington was a prodigious user of intelligence. He understood the importance of it, but at the same time, we as a state do not focus our intelligence against our population, against our people. And that's a very important point. George Washington wasn't a king. He may have been a king if he wanted to, but instead, he decided to serve the people, and that's a very important point in the days of our colonial experience. He did not become a British monarch. Instead, we became a democracy.
Can you tell us about the most impressive spy that we can discuss about?
Well, behind me, there are so many spies in intelligence history. I very much like this simple story of Morton Storm, who's right behind me. He was an individual that converted to Islam, and he traveled to Yemen. He was a Dane. He worked with the U.S. intelligence services. He worked with the British intelligence services, and he worked with the Danish intelligence services, and he provided intelligence on al-Awlaki while al-Awlaki was in Yemen. And ultimately, al-Awlaki was taken out in a drone strike. I think he is symbolic of the post-9/11 terrorist stories that we tell here at the museum. So I really enjoy being the executive director of the International Spy Museum because we're able to contextualize other historical stories, because where there's history, intelligence is in the back stairs. Intelligence is a very important part of the story. And we reveal espionage here at the Spy Museum with our artifacts, with our stories, and it's an international story. And that is exciting to tell. It's not a U.S. intelligence story, it's a global story. And that's what we do here at the International Spy Museum. We inform and educate the public on the shadowy world of intelligence and reveal that to people who come here and enjoy this amazing venue.
Can you tell us about some impactful field missions that you did in particular and you are able to discuss?
Yeah. So there's a story we tell in the Spy Museum that I like because we had an intelligence walk-in, meaning a volunteer. He was a former Taliban fighter. He came in to one of our forward operating bases in Afghanistan, and he told us he had intelligence that there was going to be an attack against U.S. military forces. I spent a lot of time with him trying to understand the intelligence, trying to make sure he was not leading us into an ambush. And at the end of the day, the intelligence proved fruitful, and we ended up saving American lives because of the intelligence that he provided.
So, Mr. Costa, what lessons can we take from spies through the American history?
So since this is the International Spy Museum, I want to make the point that we tell stories across the globe. So it's not just focused on U.S. intelligence, but what's really important from an American intelligence standpoint is we had intelligence from the earliest days of our nation. George Washington was a prodigious user of intelligence in the earliest days of the American Revolution, and we outspied the British. But when you come to the International Spy Museum, it's a universal stories. All nations in the world, or virtually all nations in the world, have intelligence services so that their policymakers, their leaders, are well informed by intelligence collection.
Mr. Chris Costa, let's talk about Saudi Arabia and the progress concerning the Vision 2030 led by the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. How do you look at this progress in the society?
So in general, I spend my time focusing on intelligence stories, counterterrorism stories, and national security issues. I will say that I have observed, just like the world public, that there's been some liberalization of cultural and social issues in Saudi Arabia, like women's rights, women driving, etc. But I think there's room for more changes over time. I also am optimistic that a 2030 plan gives Saudi Arabia time to make some of those changes.
Do you see that the progress, you talked about women, it will continue to grow more and more, and the women will have more high position in the country, in the governments also?
Well, I think in general, women's rights are absolutely crucial, and we want to see more women's rights. I think that's an international trajectory, right, in countries that don't have the same kind of rights that Western nations have. So in time, I think more countries need to do more to ensure that women have increased rights. That's not really something I watch very closely, but it's still an important story.
Do you think that the Crown Prince MBS will push for a historical change in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia?
I think we're already seeing the very beginnings of some positive changes for Saudi Arabia well into the future. But we have to take a wait and see approach and watch and listen and observe.
How do you think about the role of MBS internationally? I want to talk about his diplomatic international relations, pushing the leader of G20 to take trust in him, to put their trust in him.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's very important. That's part, MBS's visit to the United States is part of the changes that are underway in Saudi Arabia, reaching out across the globe to get the message out that changes are underway in Saudi Arabia. But again, it's a wait and see. There are still things that are happening in the region that are cause for concern, like Yemen, among other things.
How do you see what do you think about the Riyadh agreement that was made in the presence of the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, and King Salman brought all parties from Yemen to sign this agreement to bring peace to Yemen? How do you see that?
Well, I think that's a positive trend, right? I think that's an excellent trajectory. I think that that war is brutal and should be brought to conclusion, right? A lot of innocents have died on the ground in Yemen, and that's on the Arabian Peninsula, and I think it's important to have that kind of dialogue. So that is a step in the right direction, to be sure.
Do you think that the Iranian will give up on Houthis and will stop supporting them?
I can't say, but Iran continues to use proxy forces. That's what was the specialty of Soleimani, using proxies to fight wars and destabilize the region. I don't see in the short term Iran giving up on those proxy fights.
Do you expect more attacks on Saudi territories coming from Yemen to sensitive spots in the...
Yeah, I have no sense for that right now. I would say it is quite possible, and that's exactly why intelligence services need to be doing their job, so they have advance notice of attack planning.
How do you see that the reforms in Saudi Arabia will reflect the neighborhood in the region and the Gulf?
Well, I view those kinds of positive social changes, not just positive for Saudi Arabia, but an example for other nations to follow. So I view that as wholly a positive trend.
King Salman has encouraged the religion, the tolerance, and in the country. How do you foresee this openness?
Well, I did notice that also the religious police are less aggressive than they were historically. That's been one of the reforms that's made. Again, taken with all of the other liberalization of social issues and cultural issues, I think that's positive. To be tolerant is a very important imperative for states.
Mr. Costa, how do you see the bilateral relationship, historical relationship between Saudi Arabia, USA in the past versus the current situation?
Well, my sense from an outsider of government is the United States currently has a very strong relationship with Saudi Arabia, and we have had positive relationships with Saudi Arabia for many, many decades, and I think the relationship is strong and it's important. There's a lot of work to be done to maintain that relationship, like any relationship, and I think it will continue in a positive trend line.
Mr. Costa, Saudi Arabia has operated a counter-corruption war. Is there any link between this organization and the terrorist organization and the war on corruption?
Well,
I mean, financially wise.
Yeah, there's always a need to ensure that finances aren't being siphoned to terrorist organizations. Otherwise, sanctions will be put in place to track and follow the money. That's an imperative of counterterrorism policymakers, and it's imperative for the Saudis also to follow the money to make sure funding doesn't end up in the hands of terrorist organizations.
How do you think about USA tracking the money laundering like organizations like Hezbollah and others and putting them on the blacklist?
It's very important. Not only that, but rewards for justice, identifying where the funding streams are, using sanctions, and the United States in this case, has enjoyed some success in really money-starving Hezbollah. I just don't have a sense for what's happening today, but in my experience, the sanctions are a very, very important counterterrorism tool.
How do you see the situation in Syria now and the interference of Turkey in Idlib, the massacres? What is the opinion of the Trump administration from your view?
Well, I think I'm taking a view of wait and see, right? The Turks are in Idlib, and so isn't the Syrian regime. It is tragic if civilians get caught in the crossfire, but I'm watching it very closely from the outside. I don't have a sense for what is now happening on the ground in Idlib, but I know that there are remnants of Al-Qaeda there and other terrorist organizations that are problematic. Unfortunately, we don't want civilians, innocents, children, women, and others to be caught in that crossfire.
Kris Costa, former Special Assistant to the President for Counterterrorism at the NSC, and you are also a retired intelligence colonel in the U.S. Army. I want to thank you so much for this interview. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.